Okay, well, good afternoon. Thank you all for finding us. We had a little trouble ourselves finding us, but we appreciate your being here, and I can tell you you're in for a real treat this afternoon. My name is Lucy Lepofsky, and I'm the facilitator for this session, and I've worn many hats in my life. Been Director of Finance and Facilities at the Higher Ed Commission in Maryland for many years, a Chief Financial Officer, and a college president. And now I do whatever I want, which is a lot of fun. But throughout all of my career, making sure that the experience was student-centered, being in sync with what this conference is about has always been important. But I would certainly say it wasn't on top of people's minds the way it is today. And clearly today we're working in an era of a lot of whitewater in higher ed, uncertainty about what's happening, and at most of our colleges and universities, fierce competition for students, for the right students they want, for making students successful, as Nancy talked about in her talk, and trying to get our students through in a reasonable amount of time. I think my mic went off, and also making sure that we're operating in an effective and efficient manner. By training, I'm an economist, so I tend to focus much more on the financial aspects of what we talk about. And one of the questions is, if you try to have a student-centered environment, is it going to cost you more? I think that's one of the things. I did some work 2 years ago in community colleges in Ohio on a Gates-funded project to see if a student success agenda cost more than just an agenda that was focused on access and not so concerned with success. And I think the bottom line was not necessarily that it's more culture, it's more how you think, what you think about. So what we have today are two superb speakers with presentations about how we have customer-focused institutions, which when I first heard what the session was about, I thought, well, when I was back at Goucher College, we did a program to have our groundskeepers meet new guests, come to campus and smile at them and say, here, let me help you, or worry that the people in the food service, would notice if a student wasn't eating, and would smile at them and help make their day, or the housekeepers in the dorm be friendly. And we trained them all, and it did make a difference. But we never thought about the student experience from the day they walk in till the day they graduate, as that wonderful woman from CUNY talked about, how you want to make sure that everything works for them and they're connected. So we are going to have two presentations, one by Susan Lay and one by Mario, Mary, what's your last name? Martinez, sorry. By Mario Martinez. Susan's going to give a more generalized presentation, and then Mario is going to talk from his broad experience, but also talk about the case of what they're doing at National University. So each speaker is going to introduce themselves first, and then we'll go to Susan's presentation. Each presentation is going to be about 15 minutes, and at the end of the presentations, we should have plenty of time for questions. And we've been asked to try to end about 5 minutes early so you can find your way to the next set of sessions. So hopefully that will work. Susan?
I can just go.
All right, we'll let Mario introduce himself, and then your introduction is part of your presentation.
My name is Mario Martinez, and I'm the Vice Chancellor of Strategy for the National University System, which we're not known nationally quite yet. We're primarily focused in California and San Diego, and we have 3 universities. We're a nonprofit institution that focuses on serving the adult learner. So I like to tell people we're in the right business right now, given demographics and projections over the next 20 years. I was a faculty member and consultant for about 15 years before I went to the National University System. And I was asked by Michael to be a part of this session because he went to my office about 5 or 6 weeks ago, and we just talked about strategy and alliances and so forth, and the idea of service came up. And so he thought it would be an intriguing idea for me to talk a little bit about what we're doing, as Lucy said, as somewhat of a case study, but I think that draws on broader principles. So I look forward to talking to you in 15 or 20 minutes.
Mario isn't bragging, but this is his book, Creating a Service Culture in Higher Education Administration. So he brought me a copy. Susan.
Hi, and I'm Susan Lee, and I was a faculty member for 34 years, and I retired last year and started my own consulting firm. And we do teach customer service training and certification on-campus reason why I think it was a good fit for me and that it was a very successful time. First of all, DePaul in the mid-90s, and many of you may know DePaul is the largest Catholic, the 9th largest private in the United States, and it doubled its enrollment in the 90s. Those days are gone, right? But that was a blessing. It doubled its enrollment, but its service was creaking under the weight of the need. There was no way, although everyone knew the mission and everyone was really committed, they didn't know what they were doing. They had lines in every office. So I had my work cut out for me, and I had a lot to learn. Then I was at DePaul long enough in enrollment management and marketing, became an associate vice president then at DePaul. I was there long enough to see then what happened, which is what we're going to talk about, which is the now, where things started to go soft. I will have to say that DePaul's enrollment from 25,000 has increased about 1,000, that we've been able to keep hold of their market share. And one of the reasons is that they understand brand identity and service. And that's a little bit about what I want to talk about today. Oh, the other thing is I'm a first generation, which is why I think I'm very connected to students that don't understand. And I used to say at the table, it's not just Catholic students, all of our students are at risk of getting lost, trust me. I mean, I was an A student who had a free ride to Elmira College, but by January I was begging to go home back to Rhode Island because I was lost. I was out of my head. I wasn't that enrollment management fit. So let's talk a little bit about this. So why now? We all know why now. Wasn't it 2008? And by the way, I have 2 houses for sale on a lake about an hour north of Chicago, if you're interested. But it was back, 2006, 2008, and everything started to go a little funny. And, they say that things have improved, but real estate has not really come back. I got a text for that, right? And also our industry. It was touched in ways that we just haven't been able to recover. But we have to remember that the reason why that is that all of our customers, all of our students in our community were also deeply touched by the economy. And they're still really trying to figure it out. So everything's changed. Everything's sort of changed. And we want to make sure that we keep our market share. And we know we heard this morning, it was a fabulous morning. I love the conversation. But that market is shrinking. And so now we want to keep our share. We want to find out, how we can compete with that. But we have to stay true to our mission. Well, we know that the students that come in, if they're not a good mission fit, they will not graduate. They won't succeed. So we can't believe we're not, but we're trying to compete. So it's really interesting. And service plays a key role in all that. This is the way I see it fitting together. We all have a mission. We decided that this is who we're going to be, and this is the promise that we make to our students. And it grows. It's dynamic over time. Ethos, that's that Greek word for habit. And George Kuhn has a great classic article that still holds true today about campus ethos and student learning and how they fit together. This is the habit. This is the mission, how it's lived in behaviors every day on our campus. By your staff, by your faculty in classrooms, by the students. The way they treat each other, the way they treat your faculty. Your brand, and everybody wants a brand identity now. Folks will come to us and say, can you help us with our brand identity? I cannot. I was at Paul when they really tried to clarify their brand. I can help you match your service to a brand identity that you want. But the brand is what students are saying about you, whether you like it or not. It's very interesting. Schools will call us and say, I think we have a problem with service. And I ask them, and they have never looked at the Yelp reviews. Some of them are jaw-dropping. Our students can, and they do, and they're very free on social media. We're going to talk about that a little bit too. So mission, again, is what you say you're going to do. Ethos is what you live, although what you say may be different. And your brand is what people say about what you do. David Cowsby, he was my boss for 15 years. I was very blessed at DePaul, and he said strategic enrollment management is not only a nice ego for bringing in the right classroom fit, but it's that your policies, the procedures, the way you live every day, it matches that student, it understands that student, and can sort of support their success, really. You have to know your customers. Not in to look at a registrar's office or one stop. No, they'll say it's not working, we work with the staff. obviously, it's the largest web channel, service channel that's out there, it's mobile. And our students are going to want to register at Knoxville classes on the mobile. They really want to, you know? Can we blame them? You can take a picture of a check and it goes into your Chase deposit right now, right? With your phone, you can take a picture of a check. So we can't blame the student for trying and testing us in that direction. So we gotta figure out how much of that we can do. Now, we can put our course catalog in a mobile. We can put a schedule of classes, which is what we want them to register for, which will help the enrollment. We can put a map there, so when they do come to that class, they can find the classroom. So there are some things that we can do, and I guess that's what we're advocating. Social media, good news, bad news, right? We have to deal with it. It's here to stay. 5,000 customers recently surveyed said that FAQs were a good thing. Those are easy, right? Those are easy. We can put that on our website and help students sort of navigate what it is they're supposed to do. But live chat, 53% use live chat, not so easy. That's pretty difficult, and I've had some experience with that, but at least we can try and think about ways that we can do this. The tools change. What's important there is our values, our personal core mission must remain the same. Because we do or not, there will be kind of a mismatch. Big data, I'm a big data freak now. We all sit on a lot of data in our student information systems because every time someone comes in to do something, whether it be a staff, a faculty member, or a student, through the student portal, there's a record of their entry. So some of our systems deliver nice reports, some of them not so much. And you say, well, that's a lot of staffing that I have to train, or I have to get a position to do that. Not necessarily so. The people who are in charge of that transaction that we're trying to measure, they could tell you when it was started and when it was finished and completed. And I bet you there's probably a paper form somewhere in the middle that's being passed around through offices to get a sign on. So you start to learn what you need to learn by just looking at it, because it's really business intelligence. And this is what the world is doing. Everyone is focusing on users doing. Is where all the marketing money is going in all of the businesses. And yes, there's some performance management once you start to look at the data, but there's also predictive analysis. And recall, we realize we're not a pre-med institution for undergrad, although my youngest is now in medical school and does really well. I started to realize by looking at the data that we were delivering more pre-med. The students were leaving. And I started to do focus groups and said, why are we doing it? And some of the brightest and the best were using us as an unstated pre-med because they said, well, nobody knows that it's here, and I'll get to do this in the lab, and I'll get to teach in organic chem, and I'll get to cover stuff. And they started to figure it out. We put the pieces together, we partnered with Housing Franklin, which is a small hospital, and we now have pathways solid that we call. The interesting thing is that we were able to do some predictive analysis by talking to their students and also looking at the data, the course taking data, like organic chem, for instance, supposed to be taken in this part of the sequence. We all know the students are not following those expectations, right? And whether they need to sign off or not, they're doing it another different way. We started seeing that the class was closing out, so we thought we need to offer more sections. We found out they wanted to take this summer. Oh, they did it so darn hard, then you just focus on this, they do a part-time job, because this is what we need to pass it. So, you know, talking to our students. And also, we started to figure out that if we were going to be a pre-med school, we would need to have so many chemistry labs and so many beakers even, because they have to dry and impact all of this was looking at course taking data and then figuring out what we had for resources. We asked the students about their student experience at the fall. Many times, but not in a good way. This was the most organized way. We asked 100 questions. We kept away from classes, we kept away from academic advice. And we only asked them about marking and financial aid and all of that. The winners and losers from this, depending on how you want to look at it, were student records, my office, student financial accounts, and financial aid. And they said, you know, you're fabulous people, you really care about us, I'll show you how we use some data. We've opened up the two one-stops, got rid of the lines, so we had to fix the phones. So we needed to fix the phones. In our conversation, we talked about what other industries do we use their frameworks from, do we draw from? And I looked at contact centers. And this is general contact centers and that industry, and they went so much. And I started to learn about the whole principle. Don't add any of that stuff. Take the ones that you have and make the configuration a little bit different. Have all the calls go into one number, just like all the cars, we can add faster and have more than one person in it. And you will gain some efficiency. We did it. We had 168,000 phone calls a year between our three key offices and one stop. We had not integrated the phones, and the lines and the queue rates were horrible. They were really horrible. Now, after we did make everything go into one, the students said, this is fabulous, this is great, but what does this mean? This data point is student satisfaction. But here, this is the data behind it, comparing the October registration for this year to the next year. Although the calls increased almost exponentially into that one number, the acceptance rate only went down by 3%. That's because the queue wait actually was decreased. People up front were answering a lot of calls, but the short calls, the calls that can I do my FAFSA online. And then the experts were waiting, only getting the expert calls. They weren't being bothered by anybody calls. So it's just a model to show you. And then out of all that data, we can start to then, just like other industries, create performance indicators. We know about staffing, and we know about performance, and we know what we can do because we've watched the data. To wrap up, we connect then that we have to work together. That we really have everyone, the groundskeeper, everyone has to take service on and service improvement. We work with campuses to do service excellence as a campus-wide initiative. And it's what Peter Senge talks about, of everybody being able to see the whole, to get out of your silo and realize that everything you do every day will impact potential, and it does impact the health of life. I wrote about this, it came out just a year ago, in Ackerson Quarterly, and I'm at other conferences, most often in fact, I'm at ACTA, and I will be at Sam speaking about this next Tuesday, and I'll be on the vendor floor. And there's some information over there. And I think we're holding questions.
Thank
till the
you.
end. Yes.
Great presentation. Thank you very much.
Escape key, how important escape key? Okay. Well, again, thank you for having me. I'd like to give just a little bit more context before I jump into my presentation about National University. And that's because, again, our focus is on the adult learner, and our format is 1 month this is why I gave you the book, because really here we're focusing on the superior services side and we're doing it in a very practical way. So I myself personally am going around all of California. I've talked to 500 staff so far. And what I do is share the strategic framework, products that we've had a routine message over and over again to yourself and to others. And so I share our strategic framework, our mission, our vision, our values, our priorities, and so forth. But then we embark on a process of talking about what does superior service mean for them, and how does that relate to the student experience. So I give them this graphic of the student experience and ask them for their feedback and input, and we talk about that. But more importantly, we go through a couple hours of funnel-type workshop where I don't tell people what the service is, I ask them to help me define it. So it's pretty simple. I mean, what we do is we draw a picture and then I ask them to define good service, bad service, service in their department, and their own service, and then have them compare how to describe themselves with their department, these sorts of things. So very practical exercises to help people think about students they serve and their service relative to those students. So again, it's not rocket science, I know, but it's a very practical step. And more importantly, what we do is we ask every staff member, we have 3 pages that they cut out of their work booklet, and those are, they look like this, so that they jot down suggestions for us. And we ask them basically, we say, give us suggestions about what we should be doing or priority projects or initiatives that will transform from a student experience to an exceptional service. But don't give us 20 things, give us 2 things only. And by the way, relate it to one of the stages of the student experience or to one of those ingredients in our student experience so we understand how it's connected or how you can influence it. And we have 500 kind of student pieces of paper that we ask you to define challenges, strengths, and projections. And I have an analyst who gives me bar graphs, and lo and behold, we have like 5 common
Thank you, excellent. Well, our speakers learned to talk fast so that we would have plenty of time for questions. Let me start with one or two, and then we will open it up to you. Both of you talked about data and big data and the importance of it. And all the schools I work with have lots of data, but very little information. How do you help schools turn data into information?
Well,
I touched on it just a little bit in my presentation, that you have to involve the people who own the data. A lot of times it's the institutional research office that is looking at the data, and they might not understand what it means. But I'll give you an example. I think it's one we talked about in our meeting. I had my staff start to look, because we worried as enrollment got soft if we were going to be bleeding and losing students to our competition. So we started to watch where transcripts were going, where they were being sent. We have a lot of e-transcripts there, so it was very easy to watch that. But they said, I asked them, do you ever watch that? And they said, no. And I said, well, let's take a look at that, you know. So very interesting. So there we are. There's some of our students, obviously, they're going to apply early for grad school. There's some of them applying for jobs, and there's some of them before they've mentioned it to any advisors or anything, because we did some follow-up and some case studies. They were sort of testing the market and seeing what was out there. So there's an opportunity. There's an intervention that you can do if you want to do, to figure out where, you know, where are those students going to go, and you can also see if they're applying to for profits, for instance. So I mean, I think there's just one example, but it's just not been in our culture. It's not been in our cultural history. We've been so busy trying to do it, to get the work done, to get the piles off our desk, that we forget. And we also should think about the staff that do the work as data experts. They think differently about those numbers, and they will recognize trends in the data that we cannot, because we just don't know the data. So to let them be involved in that research, I think is critical.
And I would say that I agree, and I think that there's a lot of data out there that we do need to analyze to turn into information, and that's happening on some parts of the student experience. Like, it's very common in nonprofits and for-profits to analyze leads to admits, for example. There are other views of data where we have data but we don't analyze it. And so part of it, I think, is providing people frameworks and suggestions for frameworks. So for example, at the programmatic level, we are going to deans in our schools and saying, okay, we gathered data and analyzed it by program, the 3-year change in enrollment per program, plotted against the percentage of enrollment in the college of that program. And many of you have seen a Boston Consulting matrix that says cash cow, dog, star, that sort of thing. So in other words, we create tools by which to analyze our data and start meetings with that. And again, that was something that one of the speakers mentioned this morning. Start your meetings with tools and data analysis, and we're trying to do that to turn it into analysis and information.
Lucy, I have just one more quick example too. I was meeting with the dean and some faculty from liberal arts and sciences, and the liberal arts, you know, it's one of the 11 colleges that was really suffering, and they sort of wanted to grow, and so they got faculty around the table to figure out which programs they would grow and what directions they would grow, and they were going to ask the students. And I said, well, that's great, you can do that, but why not look at what they're doing already, which they hadn't thought about. And again, we looked at the last graduation class, those that walked across the stage in liberal arts and sciences. It was amazing. They had 3 and 4 majors. They had majors and minors. They were putting together the curriculum. They were dreaming it and they were doing it whenever they could. So then we took those students and put them in a focus group and asked them, you know, who gave you this idea? And of course they came up with the idea. They figured it out. And they were trying to put together on their transcript, like you put together on a resume, experience before they got out there in the job market. So again, it's just another example of the data that we sit on. We just have to think of it as a resource.
So let me see if there are questions from the group. Yes.
You had talked about shadowing as one of the service levels, and I was just interested if you could talk a little bit about when you say shadowing, is it executives coming down and like exploring your office and getting a feel? Is it other departments? Is it becoming a student for the day?
No, it's, we haven't gotten the student for the day thing, but it is, we believe that it's important at all levels to model the behavior. But the primary core values, or the primary value that'll come out of that idea of shadowing will be departments shadowing each other. Like having somebody from financial aid shadow somebody from the registrar's office, for example, or an advisor. But we want to do that as well so that we sort of contextualize and really internalize some of the jobs. And so, but it's primarily occurring at the interdepartmental levels, and that's all in an effort to increase interdepartmental communication, which we know is a challenge in our institution.
I just wanted to add too that a lot of folks that are doing campus-wide initiatives they will have staff, either executive or even frontline staff, go take a walk in September when, you know, a lot of new students are out, and just have the person say, hey, could I buy you a cup of coffee, or can I help you with that, and just ask them, you know, what they're doing, and just to really learn, to not even look at the data, but then listen to the person say, yeah, this has been hard for me, or.
Will?
This is for Mario. I'm curious, most of your students are adults. How do you prepare them for going back into a classroom or in a setting if they're out of that time? I wonder if that would help with potentially some preparation for students not ready. Yeah, well, upon the admission, I mean, there's obviously you know, we look at their application and using some analytics, we can, and this is where I think the for-profits have been really strong. They actually have algorithms to say and can predict with a pretty good degree of probability which students will have trouble based on characteristics coming into the classroom. So we're learning from that. And the other part of your question is like traditional institutions, we have support services set up immediately so that maybe within that first month class, the first week or two of class, we can begin seeing if a student's going to have trouble and try to intervene best we can. But the answer is support services and learning how to use the analytics I think that Susan was talking about. Admittedly, we've got to get better at that, but I'm not shy about saying, because I've done competitor analysis and there's some for-profits that do a pretty good job with their online students of predicting when to intervene because they might be in trouble.
Yes.
Susan, how often do you see a complete integration of a one-stop or a separation of they remain the registrar, financial aid, advising in the same space?
That is the model that I set up. So the question was, how often do we see a complete integration rather than what we call the cooperative model? Or those of us that have done it sometimes call it the uncooperative model, because it's very hard for people to play nice across silos when they report to different associate vice presidents, for instance. I think, you know, there's so many models out there, and I would have to say, because I help people with this a lot, there isn't really a best model. It depends upon what your culture is. And, you know, there's the Minnesota model where you started over here and you hire the staff and they're new, they've never worked at your institution before, and they get trained for 8 months. And then there was no money. So, you know, there was that great survey, but no money. So, I mean, basically I was hired to sort of redeploy staff. And to the students, we all wore the same shirt. And so they didn't know. We were all in the same office. They don't know to this day that they are still behind the scenes in silos, different silos. But it's very valuable. It's very, very valuable because just because of co-location, you absolutely learn from each other. You can't help it.
Let me answer that one, because actually when I was at Goucher back in the 90s, we put together a one-stop shop. And it was very interesting. We had to persuade our president, and you know, there were 3 silos we put together. Bursar, registrar, and financial aid. And so one reported to the provost, one reported to the CFO, which I was, and one to enrollment management. And enrollment management had the smallest portfolio, so the other 2 of us said, we'll give you the one-stop shop. And we just put the staff together and found a space and put them there with no additional money. But we both co-located it and gave them the same boss. And it really worked well, and it saved a lot in the end because we had so much cross-training and peaks and valleys were at different times. And the students we started with having noticed the bounce, you know, go to this office, go to that office, go to this one, come back to this one. So, you know, it's interesting because many of us at Goucher, we did start with walking through as a student and, you know, map that and timelined it to see what the student experience was. to try to figure out how best to do it. The other thing I wanted to add a bit on is I do sit on the board of the American Public University System, which is one of the largest online for-profits. And having come from the nonprofit sector, it is totally amazing what we measure, how we measure it, and then how we're able to act, because our measurement and our data is pretty much in real time to be able to intervene, to answer your question, Will, when students apply, depending on whether they have credits or not, how we check for what their weaknesses are so that they don't get in and start failing right away. And then where we, if they're not sitting in class, because online you can tell much better unless you're taking attendance in class, especially in larger classes, or even with faculty, you can't get faculty to, pick up the phone and call students to report, but we know immediately when a student hasn't checked in on a class. And so intervention, you have much better data to be able to intervene and intervene very quickly than you actually do in a in-person class, unless you really have a culture that's set up to do that intervention, which some schools are doing very well with all kinds of early intervention programs, but that requires an incredible change of culture for the faculty, to report it or to take the responsibility themselves to go ahead and intervene.
But that's that seeing the whole,
Other questions? Yes?
I'd say that in terms of a lot of what we're discussing is that people want to make service. And I think in the real world, if you look at the growth of our institutions, we have a range of readiness and eagerness. We have some faculty and staff who are downright defensive and comfortable in their silo, and they're trying to keep their silo. And we tend to live a bounce is just one of 100 different ways. Some people like the bounce because it means they don't have to learn the other officers' responsibilities. Any comments on that?
I have one thought on that, because in doing the actual sessions for 500 of our staff, I agree with you that you'll find in the feedback forms a percentage of people who really aren't interested in some of the things we're talking about. And our approach in the Chancellor's office has been to not focus on those people, but also to look for ways to incentivize the people who do care and want to improve. So for example, we have an internal, we call it an innovation incentive fund. And you're free, like faculty are a good example. We know there's a portion of faculty who do not want to change and don't want the evaluations, which are very outmoded at this point, and they'll just keep on using them. But we're offering incentives for those faculty who want to experiment with different things and so forth. So we're trying to use a carrot rather than sticks approach, knowing that pragmatically there are a percentage of people in any function, academic or non-academic, that we're probably not going to change. So we're trying to take a realistic approach to it.
So I stayed faculty my whole time up until last June when I retired. And so I was the one that had to go to faculty council to talk about service, of course. I will say that, faculty do love students, and they really don't want to harm students. And when they see the impact, especially the data impact of some of the things that they do, they don't understand a lot of times that action that they did, or what impact it had on the student body, never mind just on the 12 bodies that were in their seminar, And I have to say that my colleagues were more reasonable when we really sat down and said, something's got to change here, Some of them would admit, I really don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And if there was a way they could get out of it, they would. But they were much more reasonable, I think, when approached without myth, but with the real data.
Let me ask you a question. One of the things that's always perplexed me, and even when I was a president, wasn't able to get our data systems to work to do it, was to give individual feedback. There's only one school I know who's given faculty feedback about student retention of the students that they've touched, whether as advisors or as faculty. And they were able, this was Towson University back many years ago, and they were looking at their freshman dropout rates, and they saw that if freshmen hit certain faculty, it was like, terrible. And those students would drop out in enormous numbers. In other faculty, the students, persisted. And it's always perplexed me that we've never, or I don't know of many examples where we give back, that we have the data, we could easily get it to them. How many students did I have or touch this year who returned next year and then who ultimately graduated? Have you seen any of that? Are you thinking about any of that at National University, Mario?
Well, we've thought about it, but not acted on it for reasons that are difficult as you engage faculty. So our thought is that we would first engage them in the student experience and ideas about creating an exceptional experience before we tackled that one, actually. But we do have the data and we've talked about it, but honestly, we've thought that that's maybe for a couple years down the road. But in the meantime, we could be analyzing and learning from the data.
I think as an industry, if I could use that word, we need to think about how we're training our faculty. I never had a class that taught me how to teach. It's really interesting. My youngest is in medical school, and they don't have a how to become a doctor class, and so he and his classmates are getting together and doing it on their own, talking about it. I mean, faculty do not have classes on how to teach. And so we don't know how to do that. And I mean, I had some wonderful mentors when I was starting off, people who I trusted and could come into my classroom and give me some honest feedback of things I was doing wrong. But, I mean, maybe if we want to improve that, maybe we're starting at the wrong end of the problem. And not when it's a problem and it's been a problem for 20 years, but maybe the new students that are coming along that are thinking about becoming a PhD and they want to be part of the academy. Maybe we should think about, what it means. And student development theory, we never had any of that. Most of us have never had any of that who are faculty.
I've always said if you're a woman and have a baby, they assume you know how to be a mother. If you get a PhD, they assume you know how to teach. And
Not fair.
Neither one is correct. 5 more minutes. Okay, yes.
Do you think that customer satisfaction or customer excellence should be part of the budget?
I'll answer that and say that we're not making it part of the budget process, but we are making it part of our dashboard and our metrics. And so you mentioned satisfaction. We have a broad category called employee engagement, and that's between staff satisfaction and faculty satisfaction. And what we're using is the Chronicle survey of great colleges because we participate in that. And quite frankly, we're picking and choosing the items from that lump under staff satisfaction and faculty satisfaction. And then that ultimately goes into, the presidents are held responsible for that. So the answer is we're not building it specifically into budget, but as part of our strategic planning, it's part of our metrics and we are measuring it. And presidents are held responsible for it. But that's a practical way to incorporate it because that Chronicle survey, in my opinion, is a very helpful piece of information if your institution buys the data. And I don't work for the Chronicle.
I would say that I just wonder, you'd have to define that metric because, I showed you how, students were 98% satisfied with the contact center, but then I had to go deeper. What does that mean and why were they? And it's because they didn't have to wait to get somebody to talk to them. So you'd have to really find, what that metric means. And I also would challenge you that whether you have it officially or not, satisfaction is part of the budget process because students are leaving if they're not satisfied.
And I would add to that, that reminds me that we do use, and I know there's controversy around it, but we do use the Net Promoter Score as we measure student satisfaction actually. So we have faculty, staff satisfaction, and the Net Promoter Score for student satisfaction.
And that gets down to the detail
Yeah.
in such a better way.
Yes, one last question and then we'll let you two wrap up.
Obviously, the focus, thank you for a great panel. Obviously, the focus is on the students, but underpinning this is how employees in the institution, faculty, staff, so on, serve each other, communication, knowledge, sharing knowledge. He talks about best practices.
Yes, it's really interesting because I'll be brought in to do our certification workshops and everything, and someone will say, I don't know why I was chosen for this because I don't see students. And I'll say, oh, who are your customers? I don't have any. But they actually are doing reimbursements all day long for staff or for faculty. So we have to kind of unpack that and put that back together. But you're absolutely right. It's the same techniques. It's the same culture and the same respect we should be giving each other. That we give to the students. So it is a culture. And if we don't treat each other very well, then it's very hard to turn around and have different standards for how we treat students and their families, So, no, it's an important point.
And I would say that at National for our system, we've tried to formalize everything that we believe is an ingredient, as Nancy talked about. And as far as like the internal dynamics of departments and individuals, we have a priority that was on the framework that I showed that is community and partnership, and that includes both internal and external. And then we have sub-measures that try to get at that. So I'm not saying we're perfect at getting at that, but we want everything to relate to our strategic framework, which is the conceptual foundation, and then do implementation to make it happen.
So if both of you would just give us your last minute's worth on how best to format this how best to make institutions be able to have such a culture change, and how it then improves their competitive status.
I think service is the competitive edge. Everybody's recognized it. We're a little late to that party, but it's not too late. And as you mentioned, it's a culture that we should be treating each other the same way too. I think again, it's thinking differently. It's realizing that if staff, they see the mission, but no one's ever really talked to them about what behaviors, what competencies are included in that. So it's a whole new kind of conversation. It's empowering them in ways, it's valuing them, and then it's also saying that it's not good enough to treat people disrespectfully either, you know? So it's coming with standards in an area where we used to just let it go. We thought it was okay. And if we say it's no longer okay, but let's get together and figure out what it looks like on our campus, that's the big difference. Someone can't come in and tell you, you have to figure out what it means and how it's translated in your culture, you know? But I think it hits the bottom line tremendously and just builds retention. It's a pride of ownership. It's a happiness at work. It's key. It's really key. You retain staff and faculty as well as students.
And I would say that for us, it starts with defining a framework so we have a common language, and then creating a conversation where we can talk and staff and faculty can talk. And then it's formulating initiatives and ideas. And the other thing is that we recognize that there's a balance between what Richard Thayer calls nudges and creating mechanisms that nudge people to behavior that we hope will align like with the student experience. And there's also some need for paradigm shifts as well. So we have to find that balance. And the last thing is that for the paradigm shifts, we recognize that it's not a one-year process.
So please join me in thanking Mario and Susan for a great panel.